Starting from the middle of the 8th century BC, local culture and economy begin to decline. The demographic consists for the population of the foothills is changing significantly. The remnants of local tribes are joined by groups of people from Lower Don, Kuban and North Caucasus, and even from Middle Transnistria, as can be seen from the characteristic features of these regions in the ornamentation of ceramics. The previously empty steppe Crimean steppe is gradually adopted by Scythians. And finally, from the 7th-6th centuries BC, the entire Crimean Sea coast is in the sphere of interests of Greek sailors, especially the deep bays that are convenient for landing and port. It was in these places that the Greeks founded their first settlements. The searching for the local population at the time of Greek colonization was generally carried out by identifying archaeological sites with data from narrative sources. First of all, writing sources were taken as a basis. It should be noted that there are really few such that date back to the time of colonization and the early stages of the existence of Greek colonies. There are only a few of them that precede Herodotus' stories, and none of them mention Taurians. There are no Taurians either in the list of peoples east to the Hellespont or in Homer's hymns. Herodotus, who gives several different testimonies about them, can be considered the first mention of the Tauri, in addition to the fact that they worship the bloodthirsty goddess Parthenos. We also find a description of the custom of displaying the heads of enemies and accommodating them above the roofs near the chimneys, which is also known to us from later ethnographic descriptions of the primitive people, so as mentions of cattle breeding, of the Tauri kings who were allied with the Scythians. If the methodological stories about Iphigenia are discarded, then there will be descriptions that are quite understandable from the point of view of ethnography. In general, they are also confirmed by archaeological material. The society, judging by their type of economy, was primitive. In one of the burial grounds near Chersonesus, skulls were found staked in a pile in the opposite corner from the heads of the burial dead, which in general confirms the cult of skulls among the tribes of the Kyzyl-Koba culture of the Taurian period. And in the end, the forming of three main groups of culture, the western one in the basin of the Chornai River, here is it. All of that part is Chornai River basin. The central one in the middle course of the Salgir, here it is. and the eastern one between Zuya and Muskomia in their upper reaches. This is here, but I didn't put the point of sites. Here it is. It's near the Chinchang. These sites has very bad level of their research. In the Taurian period, all three groups existed, which suggests the existence of three tribal associations. So the story about the Tauri kings is also historically determined. There is no evidence that the colony's first contacts with the local population were hostile. Most likely just the opposite. Starting from the 5th century BC, ancient imports are recorded in the burial grounds of the local tribes, most often fragments of amphorae in commemorations as well as necklaces. Most often there was status burial associated with the head of a clan or tribe. Therefore, the contacts probably took place in the classic way with the top of the tribes through the chiefs. The results of such contacts can also be considered a classic variant of harmful social stratification among local tribes, impoverishment of the originally ordinary population, and as a result the destruction of society when ethnic characteristics are completely eliminated and it is perceived as a different cultural basis. Here is the ancient sites and Scythian cemeteries of the 6th, 4th century BC, when the appearance in the end of which the sites of sea coast was appeared, and 5th, 3rd century BC with Stelae. Here it is. It appeared in the frontier of ancient sites, and here is 2nd half of 4th century BC cemeteries. Not only burial mound, but ground too. And here is Kyzyl-Koba pottery from Kirkinitida complexes. This is from the buildings. And from the Inkerman Valley near Chersonesos, Hora, neighboring, this is the same type as Kirkinitidas. And from the northwestern Crimea and Heraklein Peninsula, this is the same types as other. And Rokosta Cemetery in Baidar Valley. Here is a stone cyst and ancient amphorae and necklace and the result of such content can also be considered a classic variant of harmful social stratification among local tribes, impoverishment of the ordinary population, and as a result the destruction of society when ethnic characteristics are completely eliminated and it is perceived as a different cultural basis. This is probably that happened to the tribes of the Kyzyl-Koba culture of the Taurian period in the 2nd half of the 4th, 3rd century BC. They the salt among sedentary Scythians who began to advance deep into the peninsula from the 4th century, BC. Here it is. The most interesting processes took place in the north to the Crimean Mountains in the central foothills. Central foothills, here it is. In the 4th century BC, in the steppes to the north of the central foothills, one of the Scythian tribes roamed, which had certain differences in material culture. Its main features were the presence of specific Eastern Bosporan ceramics in burials. The same pottery was found in one of the local tribes, local burial groups in the north of the Crimean Mountains, which was interpreted as the Kyzyl-Koba culture, the Japallah. It was here. In analysis of the material showed that this burial ground belongs to a syncretic population which probably was a Kyzyl-Koba component, but is closer to the Eastern Bosporus population in terms of burial custom. In general, sites of this type can be considered the basis of the so-called Late Scythian component, which became prevalent in the Crimea in Roman times. Here is a little about the Late Scythians and Scythian-Taurians. The Japallah cemetery is mentioned in the paper by Chris, together with other excavations by Leskov in the Crimea, such as the cemetery of Urkosta. Chris, referring to Vyazmitina's definition, came to the conclusion that the excavations by Leskov were of poor quality and the finds was determined incorrectly, so were not possible to analyze. When acquainted with the collection, we come to the conclusion that such a contention is evaluative and based, related to Chris' personal attitude towards Leskov. He remarks on the quality of excavation, recording and the description of archaeological objects should be taken into consideration in the case of the Japallah cemetery, but only as regards their insufficient detail. With the missing excavation report, this association seems unfair, as detailed description should be in the report. As can be seen from the Urkosta excavation report, which, unlike the Japallah excavation report, has been perceived in the archive. In general, the description of the archaeological site in paper is exactly consistent with the archaeological realities, despite the fact that attention of such sites began only a decade ago. The finds are also described correctly, but incompletely. Here it is. This is the burial mound of Japallah, and finds from the commemoration. The question of the ethnicity of the Crimean population after the evanescence of Great Scythia was a subject of scientific interest of many scholars. Olchowski, typologizing cemeteries, identified several population groups, classifying them as purely Scythians, purely Tauri, and those who have the features of both. He dates the first two ethnically poor groups to the 7th, 5th century BC. The other two include the late Kyzyl-Koba cemeteries, which are mentioned in this lecture, Urkosta, Druzhny II, etc., and the Scythian, late Scythian burials, both dating from the 4th century BC and existing during Hellenistic time. However, the conclusion about the beginning of marginalization and formation of the Scythian Taurian population in the 7th century BC is not yet confirmed. The author appears to Herodotus and his story of the ditch of the blind, from whom came a tribe of descendants of the Scythian and slaves. In our opinion, the process of contact between early Tauri and steppe population of 8th, 7th century BC was slightly different, as described in a number of articles. Late Tauri, as a result of contacts with the steppe nomads who came to the Crimea in the 4th century BC, lost their ethnic characteristics already in the 3rd century BC. The most striking of which is the ornamentation of ceramics, and stopped burying in the stone schist of their tribal cemeteries. Mentions in the texts of Roman authors of the Taurian Scythians or Scythian Taurians probably belongs to the ethnic group of the Crimea. Another version of the ethnic origin of the East Crimean foothill groups of Crimean barbarians is proposed by Crapunov. He believes that about the 5th century BC, a group of Taurian people crossed the steppe and settled near the coast of the Sea of Azov on the Kerch Peninsula. She argues for Taurian burials surrounded by cromlechs in the coast of Azov during the 5th date from the 5th to the 1st centuries BC. In the 2nd, 1st centuries BC, Krapunov sees them returning to the foothills, and herewith explains the appearance of these burials there. In our opinion, the resettlement of the 5th century BC originated not from the foothills of the Crimea, but from the territory of the ancient Bosporus, where such a funeral custom had deep roots. As discussed above, the appearance of this population in the foothills in the 2nd, 1st centuries BC is associated with the next stage of the history of Crimea, represented by the advancement of the Sarmatians and then by the creation of the Gothic-Alanian Union. Assimilation of the Tauri by the Scythian tribes who came to the Crimea in the 4th century BC took place during the second half of the 4th, 3rd centuries BC, and is marked by the evanescence of ornamentation of Kyzyl-Koba pottery and the cessation of the functioning of the classic Taurian rose cemeteries of stone schist. those given the presence of two compact groups of finds dating from the beginning of the Taurian period of the Kyzyl-Koba culture, 8th-7th centuries BC, and about the 4th-3rd centuries BC, it should be assumed that the burial in the Japallah area appeared from the second half of the 8th, early 7th century BC. We describe it burial with stone cists as a main grave in Yukarina-Balka on the Herculean Peninsula and in the central foothills, where they have the same dating. The second period of this use dates to the time of the marginalization of the Kyzyl-Koba ethnic component Tauri and the beginning of the formation of the Late Scythian ethnic massive, which dates back to about 4th century BC. The burial custom of Tauri is changing at this time, and earlier burials are used, cleared of previous burials. Probably a stone pavement with funeral feast under the burial also belongs to this late period, as late Scythian pottery of the eastern Crimean types was found benefit. Stone pavement accompanied and the methods of arrangement of the burial as cysts are typical for new row cemeteries for the late stage of the Taurian period of the Kyzyl-Koba culture. The presence of traditional Taurian handmade pottery of East Crimean types in the Scythian burial of the steppe of the 4th century BC suggests the existence of a certain Scythian tribe which was in a direct contact with the inhabitants of the central and eastern foothills of the Crimea. Such contact could have created a new ethnic group that, in the space of a few centuries, formed the first barbaric state in the Crimea, the Crimean Scythia. Those contain the general process of the formation of early Hellenistic monarch in the area of the Pontus Exinus. The fact that the marginalization of the Tauri began with the transformation of the burial customs indicates the primacy of changes in the ideological preferences of the Taurian ethnic component and changes in the religion and cults of this population. It is also worth talking not about the transformation of funeral tradition, but about their complete change. Given the fact that the religion of the Tauri, according to the available sources proposed in recent studies, was quite primitive and based on the paradigm of Bronze Age ideology, and completely change is more likely than a transformation. In fact, a little later, an ancient Roman author used a few ethnonym Taurian Scythians or Scythian Taurian. So this is offering and accessories from the Japallah cemetery, and thank you for your attention. Any question you can ask me by my email.